I'm going to make this little table entirely out of salvage materials. And for that, I've got this pine and this maple. These are, I salvaged back over the winter. This is what's left of a headboard and footboard, the legs of a headboard and footboard. So this is like a solid chunk of pine. And then this is a remainder of a tabletop that I pulled out of the trash a couple of years ago, I think by now. And this is maple. And I need a 10 by 12 piece for the top, and I'm going to cut that out of this maple, so that is nice and easy. And for thickness, this is just about 7/8 of an inch thick, which is great because I could just plane this top off, plane the finish off the top to bring it down to the 3/4 inch. I'm first going to rip this a bit heavy at 10 1/8. And then I will plane off the finish, and then we'll take it down to the final dimensions. And here I got it nicely planed down to 3/4 of an inch in thickness. And yeah, once you get the stain off, it's like this part of the maple is one color and this part of the maple is another color. Yeah, you were never knowing what you're going to get with using salvaged maple that had stain on it. This is going to require a whole bunch of slicing to get the boards that I need. I'm not sure how much wood I'm going to get out of these, so I'm just going to do a whole bunch of ripping. You could rip this on the table saw. That would, you just have to run it through and then flip it and run it through. But I'm going to do this on my bandsaw because I think that'll be a little bit quicker, though the cut may be a bit rougher. So, but I'm expecting I'm going to be planing these afterwards. So. So I sliced 2 at an inch thick for the legs, and I've sliced 4 so far at 3/4 of an inch for the rest of the body. And it's actually kind of slow. I'm not sure if my bandsaw blade is maybe a bit dull or if it's my technique, but I'm going to slice a few on my table saw just for my own interest and to compare. Does make a mess. That went so well that I actually prepared even more than I think I need. So next step is going to be planing these down to thickness, and then we'll get on with the table build. So there we go. This is all just between 1/2 and 5/8, and this is between 3/4 and 7/8 of an inch thick. So these are going to be the legs, and this is going to be the rest of it. And don't forget the maple top. So let me just pause for a moment and we'll talk about what I'm building. I've got this bookshelf where I display Lego, and beside it right now I have my Lego rocket standing on a piece of scrap. And I designed this little table, and I'll show the 3D model right now while I'm talking about it. It's just a tiny little table, 8 inches high, 10 by 12 top, that I just thought might look better as a base for the Lego rocket. So yeah, because I've got a shop, I'm just going to make some custom little table that suits what I want. So with my stock prepared, I'm going to start with these thicker pieces, and I'm going to rip them into 7/8 by 7/8 inch legs. And after ripping them to size, I then cross cut them down to the finished length of 7 1/4 inches. And I've had trouble with tapering before, so I made sure to make a few extra, and this is really going to be a short table, as you can see, because those are the legs, 7 1/4 inches. On the legs, I want just a little taper here at the bottom on 2 sides. And for that, I'm going to use my ad hoc tapering jig that I've got here on my table saw. This is just a piece of plywood with a runner under it, so it runs in the miter slot of the table saw. It is sized to slide right alongside the table saw blade. On my leg, I've marked where I want the taper to start, and here showing at the bottom how I want these parts to be cut off. So I have this stop block here at the end, and this pencil mark, I have it lining up with that. And these pieces are just arranged in a way so that when I tip this end firmly, then this line starts right at the cut line, and this line is here, and then I just put this backer block behind it to support it. Then we just clamp it into place. This other clamp is just left over from when I was tapering something longer. For years I used to just freehand my tapered legs on the bandsaw and then I would clean it up with a hand plane, but now that I've got this jig set up, each time it requires a little bit of fiddling and, you know, a test piece to get the first one done, but after that you could just knock them out really quick and easily. So I'm wishing I'd done this years ago. I then ripped the side panels to length and ripped and cut the side panels to size. And there are only 3 of them because there's going to be a drawer in the front. So positioned upside down, it's going to look something like that with the 4 legs and the 3 sides and this opening. Now normally if this was a more ordinary sized table with a drawer in the front, you'd want some sort of side-to-side structural strength for the table, but this is such a tiny little thing that I really don't think it's going to make much of a difference. And if it is, well, I'll fix it. Now I think I'm going to attach the sides to the legs with some dowels, but before I get into that, I need to plan ahead with how I'm going to attach this structure to the tabletop. And there's not really room for those clips that I might normally use, so I think I'm going to just use pocket holes, which means I need to do that now in these side pieces so it's ready to be attached later. I just have the regular Craig pocket hole jig. I know they make one that's meant for tiny stuff, but I don't have that. And this is normally meant for 3/4 inch stock, but I do have some settings for drilling into 1/2 inch stock. But I do recommend you do some practice cut drills first because, you know, I followed the proper settings and it just blew out the bottom on my first test piece. So I had to adjust things a bit, going a little away from the instructions in order to make it fit. So while I have my drill bit set according to the instructions for 1/2 inch stock, the actual depth I have on my jig, I have it set to a 5/8 inch thick. It works. For the dowel joints, I'll be using my Dowelmax jig. Longtime viewers are not going to be surprised at all because I've used this for years and I love it. For tiny wood like this, I'll be using 1/4 inch dowels, and even that is probably overkill, but I have 1.5 inch dowels, which I think is probably too long. So I'm just going to take the dowels and I'll cut them down to about 1 inch in length, which should give me plenty of penetration into both sides of the joint. Now there were a couple of things I kept in mind since I'm working with such tiny little stock. First of all, very important to do some test pieces first just to test everything out, because for instance, I discovered that these holes are really close to the side, and I almost thought about trying to come up with something else, but again, it's such a tiny table, there are not going to be heavy strains on it. This should be okay. But another thing is I'm putting joints on 2 sides of these legs, so I was careful to offset the dowel holes. So on the first set I would drill in the 1st and the 3rd hole, and then over here I would drill on the 2nd and the 4th hole in the dowel jig, which worked out great. I only messed up once. Again, that's why we have spare pieces. And just keeping it all straight, because then you had to do the same thing on the side pieces versus the back. The side pieces had their dowel holes in a different location than the back piece. So just a whole bunch of things that you want to keep straight and take your time and make extra pieces. And a little dry fit, and it goes together like that. And that is what we're looking for. I'm going to glue up the sides first. Just a little dab of glue in each hole. Shouldn't need much. I like to spread it around with a toothpick. A little bit of light clamping. You shouldn't need much because these are nicely together already. And I'll let the glue set up on there for 30 to 45 minutes before I attach the back and turn it into a 3-dimensional object. So the little drawer is going to fit into this space, and for that I'm going to have some runners along here that the drawer will slot onto. That'll all become clear later. Now, This is pine, but I want to make the runners out of hardwood. So I've prepared some 3/8 inch thick maple. This is undoubtedly way overkill for this little drawer, which is hardly ever going to be open, but hardwood maple will wear a bit better over the long term. I want them to fit about halfway up the side here, so I went into my scrap pile and I found just a likely sized spacer that I can just line up across the bottom. And then I will line this up to that. Put a little dab of glue along here. A couple of 1/2 inch pins will hold it in place while the glue dries. And there we go. I want to cut the drawer to fit the opening, so the next thing I'm going to work on is getting the top installed. As mentioned at the beginning, I'm using salvaged maple for the top. It's 12 inches by 10 inches, so now let's work on the edge treatment. I want a fairly large chamfer underneath the table, so I'm going to put this rather sizable chamfering bit in my router for this first cut. The router bit had a bearing on it, but I still like to use a fence. For one thing, it gives me a place to hook up my dust collection, but it also just gives me a nice large bearing surface for safety and comfort. And yeah, I ran a test piece first, which looked good, so that I could move on to the actual piece. Always doing the end grain first, just in case there's any chip out, and then going along and doing the long grain, and I think it turned out really good. So on the other side, I'm just going to do a little round over, which I'll use with my handheld router. Before I attach this, I'm going to do some sanding. And then I'm going to stain it with this ebony stain. I did a test piece earlier along with another color, and I decided that it was going to be too much pale on pale if I just had the maple on the pine without anything else. And so I thought I would just experiment and give it a little bit of color to the top. This has had one coat of shellac after the stain, and then I will put some poly after that. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Maple is a very dense wood, so it's not the best at absorbing. So really, I would be better off with a tinting sort of effect, but this is what I have, and it works. Let that soak for a bit and then wipe it off. Now we let it sit for 8 hours to dry. So I came down to the shop this morning and the stain was all nice and dry, and I added a coat of shellac, but not only to the top, but I also added it to the base. That gives it a nice protective coat, and with that I can now get it on with attaching this to the base. Well, actually, first I'm going to give it a quick sanding. This is just 220. Just a quick once over to knock down any roughness. I do have one little flaw here on the top. There was a screw hole here that I had to plug, but we're just going to make sure that that's at the back of the table. Speaking of which, I'm going to now position the table here, and I have this little block which is cut to be a spacer. I'm just going to lay that in there just to make sure that these don't shift closer to each other as I screw them in. With cutting the chamfer, I don't remember anymore how much the spacing is, so I'm just going to eyeball it. I think about a 1/2 inch on this side looks good. This is one of those, if it looks straight, it is straight situations. I'm using just 1 inch long screws because we're going into something that's quite small. Hang on a second. I really don't want it to shift when I'm screwing, so I'm going to just lightly clamp it, and then I'm going to double check all my measurements. Still about a 1/2 inch there. Put one there, and let's put one here at the same time. Turn it around and clamp the other side. And there is the beginnings of our little table. If you looked at it from that side, you'd think it was done. Now we have a whole drawer to make still. So if you'll recall, I made a whole bunch of 1/2 inch thick stock that I was planning to use for the rest of the structure of the drawer and the table, but then with these 3/8 inch thick runners, I realized that that's not thick enough. It's because, you know, you cut a 3/8 inch deep groove in a piece of 1/2 inch thick stock and there's just not that much left. So I prepared some more 3/4 inch thick stock that I can use for the drawer sides. The front and the back can still be at a 1/2 inch. And I prepared 3 pieces for the sides, again, 1 for a spare. And next I'll work on getting a dado run into each piece so that the groove on this matches the runner in the drawer. There's always a bit of fiddling and adjusting when you're getting a dado blade set up, but after 2 blade changes, 3 fence adjustments, and I forget how many height adjustments, I've got my settings dialed in so that I can cut the slots for this. And I've got 3 pieces and they will fit on this side or on this side. There's just a little bit of snugness to them, which can then be easily sanded out. And then I just left the dado blade as it was and set up a stop on the fence so that I could then cut the 1/2 inch rabbet that I need on the end of the pieces. And then I cross-cut the front and back to fit. And with the 2 side pieces fitted in, this front piece drops right in, and then the back piece will go back there. So let's get this glued up. And yes, in case it wasn't obvious, I'm using rabbets to join the sides of the drawer to the back and the front. Nice little rabbet to lock things together. Again, tiny little drawer that we're working on here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure corner to corner. 10 3/4. No, that's not square. Let me square that up a bit more. So I had to turn the camera off. Things were getting hectic and the glue was setting and it wasn't quite square, but I have rearranged and rejigged the clamps and everything should be good now. And I've got a measurement of 10 7/8 across one corner and 10 7/8 across the other. So it is square and all the joints are looking nice and tight. So we will just let this thing sit for a little while. And once the glue is set up, I'm just getting the clamps off. And I prepared a thin piece of plywood that is going to be the bottom. And I'm going to put that on, and that is also going to help keep everything where it should be. Also, a little bit of glue. And yes, that's a ridiculous amount of pins, but they are clamping this into position for us. I'm also going to put some dowels into the edges of the joints for reinforcement. I have a piece of flagging tape on my drill bit so I don't go too deep. Again, a little bit of glue. Tap in a couple of dowels into each joint. And then cut them flush. That's my foot. Ow. And those joints are not going to come apart. A little bit sanding later on to clean them up. And after sanding the dowels flush, I also just sanded the sides a bit, and it slides in pretty nice at the beginning, but then it gets a little stiff at the end, and I think it's just friction. So I'm going to try adding some paste wax. Just nothing but plain paste finishing wax. And let's see if a little bit of wax will help smooth it. And a little bit of wax, and that's a lot better. That is a lot better. Now we need a front. And for that I prepared one of the last pieces of the 1/2 inch stock that I have. That'll look nicely there. And I think I'm just going to glue it into place. And there we go. And then after that dried, the next step is going to be to put some shellac on the drawer. And I also went into my cupboard and dug through my stash, and I found this wooden knob that I'm planning to use. I've got it mounted in here so that I can get some shellac on this too. I think it's still going to look a little dark compared to the drawer, but that'll change in time. Find center here on the drawer face. I'm going to hold a backer block behind it as I drill. So the exit hole is fairly clean. Now about that lacquering. I was going to do poly, but I changed my mind. Lacquer is quick and simple, so I'm going to take them outside now and hit them with some spray lacquer. And as usual, I take some crumpled paper to burnish the lacquer afterwards. Makes it much more smooth to the touch. And then a wooden knob in place. Sometimes you need a stubby. And that is the end of this little miniature table. Okay guys, that's it for this little project. Now let me cut to upstairs. And here it is installed with my Lego rocket. Looks a lot better than the old stand, I think. Matches the vision that I had for this space. And that's about it for this one. We'll see you next time.